This is Sky News. In just a moment, our press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories tonight. President-elect Joe Biden has attended Mass at his local Catholic church after vowing to reunite America. Donald Trump, who has so far refused to concede the presidential election, has spent another day on the golf course. And the Queen has led the country in commemorating the nation's war dead on Remembrance Sunday at a scaled-down ceremony because, of course, of the coronavirus pandemic. Well, time then for our press preview. First look at what's on the front pages as they arrive here. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Spike, that's Tom Slater, and the Chief Leader Writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha. Let's just take you through the papers as we've seen them come in, though, first. We start with the Daily Telegraph. It says the current US president's under growing pressure to leave the White House quietly as George W. Bush congratulated Joe Biden on his fundamentally fair victory. The Guardian reports how President-elect Joe Biden has already got to work as, quote, Trump fumes. Trump the Grump is the headline in the Metro, claiming Donald Trump is refusing to accept defeat and blaming the lamestream media. The Times has a story actually about GCHQ starting an offensive operation on anti-vax propaganda. The FT, the Financial Times, reports on the President-elect Joe Biden preparing orders to reverse some of Donald Trump's signature policies with executive orders. Unions warn exhausted NHS staff could quit if they don't get a pay rise and, quote, praise is not enough. That's on the front of the Mirror. Meanwhile, the Mail speculates that the BBC could be sued over the interview with Princess Diana, done by Martin Bashir. And the Star features the next I'm a Celebrity lineup and how financially it is saving the fortunes of some of the cast who participate. Well, we're joined then tonight by the Deputy Editor of Spike, Tom Slater, Chief Leader Writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha. Welcome to you both. Sonia, if we can start with you. The Metro has got an arresting headline and a couple of interesting pictures. Trump the Grump, says the Metro.
Yes, that's right. And it's a sort of picture of the past and the future. So it's got a picture of President Trump and a picture of President-elect Biden. And really what this is focusing on is the last sort of couple of days for President Trump. It would absolutely be the norm that by now the president, who's clearly just lost an election, would have conceded gracefully to his successor-to-be. But of course, Trump isn't a normal president. And he hasn't done that. He's been playing golf on a golf course for the last 2 days. He's refused to concede. He continues to allege that this election was stolen, that there's been false ballots sort of cast. Absolutely no evidence for this. And really, he's behaving like a spoiled toddler, really. There is a chilling side to this, though, which is that he is clearly trying to undermine he's trying to undermine Americans' kind of trust in democracy and democratic institutions. We've all observed this election take place in recent days. What's very clear is that it's American democracy working, but Trump has tried to allege all along that there are issues, that there are problems, that there are people trying to cheat the system. Absolutely no evidence for this. But it's really worrying, I think, that he is still speaking to his supporters and challenging the legitimacy of what is, of course, a very legitimate election and a resounding victory for Joe Biden.
Tom, a corrosive effect on democracy itself and all those who look to America as a leading light?
Oh, certainly. I think what Donald Trump is doing in failing to concede is completely wrong. It's also pretty pathetic. I think Sonia definitely has a point when it seems like he's throwing a bit of a temper tantrum here. And in terms of some of the fraud that he's alleging, the idea that the election was stolen from him, there's no credible evidence towards that. There's some ongoing cases going on about some irregularities, but even those wouldn't be enough to swing the victory for Joe Biden that we saw. But I think in the Trump era, which is now drawing to a close, two things are often true at the same time, one of which is that Donald Trump is behaving in a terribly undemocratic way. But I also think that a lot of his critics, both in the US Democratic establishment as well as in the UK as well, would have a lot better leg to stand on if a lot of them didn't respond to the election of Trump in 2016 by trying to delegitimize him, most notably, I think, through the Russiagate conspiracy, the idea that this was all Vladimir Putin's work. And similarly, many Remainers who are suddenly piping up about the attack on democracy in the US, who spent a lot of time attacking it in the UK. So, as is so often the case, Trump is behaving in a pretty deplorable fashion. But at the same time, I think a lot of his critics would have a better leg to stand on if they hadn't spent the past 4 years making him look like a bit of a rank amateur where this sort of thing is concerned.
Sonia, could we just drill down a little bit into who perhaps might catch the ear of the president and exercise his conscience? That old idea that used to apply, for instance, when Lady Thatcher was in office, that it would be the men in grey suits who would come round and persuade her to leave office. Here, according to the Telegraph on the front page, it's Melania Trump saying perhaps or suggesting it's time to go, whilst his sons are urging him to maybe hang on.
Yeah, well, there have been reports that people around him in his family have urged him to concede, particularly in light of the fact that the last Republican president, George W. Bush, has issued a very gracious statement about Joe Biden's victory, saying he's a good man. So it looks increasingly ridiculous that Trump hasn't conceded. I think it is worth just pointing out that the White House itself has denied these reports, and you've had Melania Trump put out a tweet this evening saying, basically echoing the sentiments of her husband that this election was stolen. But it's interesting that these noises are coming out, that there are people who are sort of trying to persuade him to concede. I'm not sure they're going to have much luck, though. One thing we know about President Trump is that he doesn't give in easily. He's incredibly stubborn. And I expect we're going to be seeing increasingly fraught tweets from him over the next few days, continuing to allege without any evidence at all that this election was stolen.
And Tom, according to the Financial Times, front page of the Financial Times, none of what President Trump is doing or not doing is affecting Joe Biden's plans for executive orders that would pretty quickly unravel some elements of what might have been Donald Trump's legacy.
Precisely, and almost a kind of a mirror image of what Donald Trump set to work doing when he first came into office, trying to unpick the legacy of his predecessor. So the FT picking up on two particular policy differences. So Biden looking to bring the United States back into the Paris Climate Accord, which the US officially left actually the day after Election Day, I think I'm right in saying, and also to ensure that it rejoins and reaffirms its relationship with the World Health Organization, which Donald Trump, to much scandal earlier this year, edged his way out of. So I think what we're really seeing is Joe Biden again, distancing himself very much from the previous administration via the means of executive orders, which have, to some degree, to quite an alarming extent, become the means through which a lot of American presidents force through their agenda in quite a top-down way in recent administrations. He's really trying to demonstrate that, again, he's kind of bringing it back to that kind of rules-based, international, kind of supranational kind of order that the American political class is very attached to, and Donald Trump attempted to unpick during his presidency.
And Sonia, just take us inside the Metro. A headline, ex-US aide, Johnson seen as a racist creep.
Well, so this is referring to a tweet by a former Obama aide, and it kind of went viral on Twitter. It was trending on Twitter, but basically he sort of retweeted Boris Johnson's statement congratulating Joseph Biden on his election, and sort of said, here's a return of the sort of shape-shifting creep. And I think it shows how much bad feeling there is amongst Obama officials around some of the stuff that Boris Johnson was saying about President Obama in his newspaper columns, including outrageous and quite racist sentiments that the reason that Obama moved a bust of Churchill out of the Oval Office was because of his part Kenyan heritage. Really quite disgusting. And that created a lot of anger amongst Obama's officials, some of whom will be going on to work for Joe Biden. So I think, one of the reasons why that tweet has attracted so much attention is because there's a lot of interest in how the Biden administration will see Boris Johnson. I don't think it's any secret that they're not major fans of Boris Johnson. They see him being as quite akin to Donald Trump in some of the populist tactics that he uses, in the fact that he isn't always quite straight with the electorate and with voters. He's really, happy to bend kind of norms. He's not, nowhere near Donald Trump, but I think they see him that some people see him as a sort of a kind of slight approximation of him. But at the same time, there are more official noises coming from people who are close to Biden, as you would expect, really, with a more diplomatic tone. So I think it's important to say this is somebody who is tweeting in a personal capacity, but I think it is very revealing. And I think, obviously, the official noises coming out of the White House will be nothing like that. But I think it's clear that Boris Johnson and Joe Biden, it's not going to be, they don't have a warm relationship, they don't know each other, and Boris Johnson is not going to be at the top of Joe Biden's list. We think it's going to be Angela Merkel and Macron who are at the top of those lists, and that's what UK diplomatic sources are saying.
Well, we'll talk about some of those potential ramifications very shortly. For now, we'll tell you what's coming up, shall we? Yet another U-turn from the government, this time on free school meals. More on that after the break. Welcome back, and welcome back to the second half of our press preview with us still Tom Slater and Sonia Sodha. And Tom, we'll start with you, restart with you if we can, and take us, if you would, to the Daily Mirror inside the paper. The paper's making the point that it'd like to see NHS staff receive a big COVID pay rise, but actually the sidebar story, headline calls to sack Tory crony vaccine tsar. Tell us more.
So this is an ongoing scandal involving Kate Bingham, who is the vaccine czar, as you say. This really started when it was revealed that she revealed official sensitive information about the government's immunisation programme to basically groups of venture capitalists, a kind of Zoom conference, $200 a ticket. There's been added allegations over the course of today, revelations in the Sunday Times that she's not only due to address another conference that's coming up in a few months' time, but has also been paying consultants exorbitant funds, it seems, in order to man her communication. So there is pressure from the Labour Party for her to step down. I think this also strikes people as being a bit of a part of a pattern in terms of the government's use of these kinds of czars, Dido Harding famously as well being another kind of Tory-linked appointee whose main CV, it seems to be, is one of failing upwards to some degree, and a lot of pressure on the government in terms of how money is being spent, but also an element of cronyism that seems to be creeping in relation to these very important appointed positions that they've made.
Sonia, I suppose the argument that's advanced by government for these czars is they're quite good at getting things done, the argument runs. They're not drawn usually from the civil service gene pool. They bring outside ideas to bear.
Well, I think that depends very much on the czar in question and what sort of job they're doing. It is true that sometimes external experts have been brought into great effect, but I don't think that that's the case either with the test, track and trace scheme, which Dido Harding is running, which Tom just referenced. We know that hasn't gone well. The government spent £12 billion on setting up this infrastructure, and it is not working as well as needed. And there's been a lot of bungling there. And now we've got this with the vaccine task force. And I mean, if someone wants to come in and help advise government and do it at a modest cost, that's one thing. But, this is a huge amount that's being spent on PR consultants. And actually, what the story suggests is that this was quite strongly resisted from within government, because there are, of course, a whole raft of government press officers whose job it is to do the communications on a government vaccine task force like this. And apparently, Kate Bingham, who was actually married to a Conservative Minister Jessie Norman, insisted on bringing in these consultants at great cost to the taxpayer. It's not the first time we've heard about consultants being paid a lot of money in relation to coronavirus as well. There was another story a few weeks ago about consultants getting paid exorbitant amounts on the track and trace scheme. And this is supposed to be a government that's not into using consultants. So I think there are really serious questions about who's getting appointed to these jobs. Why are they getting appointed to these jobs? Is it because of their personal connections, because they tend to be personally connected to Conservative MPs? That's the case with both Kate Bingham and Dido Harding. Why aren't these jobs being advertised externally, for example? So a whole host of really serious questions for a government, and it does look like cronyism and favouritism to me.
And Tom, the government is certainly, in quotes, consulting with Marcus Rashford. Tell us about this U-turn.
Yes, so this was the story snuck out today while everyone was talking about the US presidency. That's no just happy coincidence. I'll assure people that the government has U-turned on the question of free school meals over the holidays, so acceding to Marcus Rashford's campaign, who has been fighting very hard for these meals to continue over the break. and 170 million has now been earmarked to that end. It's been a bit of a kind of open sore for the government in recent months. It's expended a lot of political capital in recent weeks fighting this, when really actually the amount of money that we're talking about is kind of a drop in the ocean. But I think it's also worth recognising that when we're looking at the kind of scale of the economic crisis that we're heading to as a result of this unending lockdown we've been in, I also think that the question of free school meals is also a bit of a drop in the ocean in relation to the inequality and the poverty that we're going to see really start to bite in recent months, especially as the full impact is going to be felt. So yes, another victory for Marcus Rashford, but I do fear that this is one of those things which will feel a bit like a very small sticking plaster in the months to come.
Yeah, Sonia, briefly, go on.
I would completely agree with that. And this extra money, first of all, it's just disgraceful that Marcus Rashford has had to shame the government again into doing a U-turn on this. But also, this money, it is a drop in the ocean. It comes in the context of a decade of really steep cuts to tax credits and benefits for low-income working families with children that has seen some of them lose to, sums to the tune of thousands of pounds a year. So it just does not go far enough. It looks mean.
Sonia Sodha, Tom Slater, got to leave it there. We'll see you in half an hour or so. Thanks very much indeed. More news coming up here on Sky. Stay with us.